Go ahead and have a seat if you would, please. I'm going to get started in a minute or so. Cool. Okay. So I'm Mike St. John's. I'm going to be giving the Newcomers presentation. My claim to fame in the IETF is probably that I've attended more of these meetings than anybody else. This is my 95th. So I've been doing it since basically meeting one. Does anybody recognize that phrase up there? You're in a maze of twisty little passages all alike. This is from an old computer text game called Adventure. And part of how that's related to this is I'm trying to help you work your way through the maze of what the IETF is. This presentation is all about trying to give you the tools you need to survive a week at the IETF and then decide you aren't completely dead at the end of the week and want to come back again. This is a slide you'll be seeing a lot of. You don't have to read it right now, but it's important to understand that for you to understand that when you're here, you are generally making an IETF contribution. So things that you say in working groups, if you're saying them in a working group or to someone who is discussing things about the IETF, is an IETF contribution, which means it's not something that you can basically go, oh, keep it confidential or things like that. If you want to have those talks, go ahead and take somebody out someplace else, out of the working groups or areas or off in a corner somewhere and have that conversation. But be aware, unless if you're working with people who you haven't talked to before, this may apply. So there's a bunch of different other things, but go ahead and read this later on. It will show up in every meeting, in every session you go to. This is not the history of the IETF. There's 30-some years of that going on. This is not how to write a standard. There are documents for that. This is basically how to survive this week. And, this is what I looked like during several of the IETF meetings. Way back when we had the longest working group session ever, it started about 8:30 or 9 in the morning, ran until 2 o'clock the next morning. We sent out for pizza twice. So pace yourselves through this. This is a busy week, and you can overextend yourselves, especially if this is your first time trying to do everything. The IETF, by the way, is not a conference in where it's designed for tutorials. This is all working sessions. So it's all about the standards and standards development. It's not about teaching you new things, with the exception of things like these sessions and other tutorial sessions on Sunday. I'm going to be talking about the IETF, how it differs from other standards development organizations, give you a little bit on IETF culture, and it's important because we are different than other standards development organizations. I'll talk about what a working group is, what birds of a feather sessions are and how they differ. I'm going to give you a little bit of guidance on how to act in a working group, the etiquette, if you will, and the meeting etiquette. And there are two different things there. We'll talk about how the IETF makes decisions, the consensus. I'm going to give you some clues about what the people that are doing that you're encountering, mainly because they will have various dots on their badges and things along those lines. And I can't look down without making it really sound well. Point out a little bit more information about people that you'll encounter, documents and tools that you can get. And I'm talking a little bit about the Internet Research Task Force because they meet at the same place and the same time as the IETF. And you are allowed to go into their sessions, but they are not the IETF sessions. And I'll explain why that's kind of important. I'll give you some other resources. There's a set of slides at the end that'll hopefully get you started on the network and on Jabber. And we'll go from there. So, the IETF is an organized activity in the Internet Society. That wasn't always the case. The IETF was part of a collection of organizations put together by the United States government to get the internet up and running, okay? This was just one of those. When we got started, the IETF was an engineering organization, which is why we have engineering in our name. It's now a standards organization. We never got around to changing the name. The engineering part was to put together the Department of Defense MILNet and ARPANET, NASA Science Internet Network, the NSF Net, and the DOE's ES network, and eventually to start transitioning into a more commercial model. So that was probably about the first 3 years of the IETF. About meeting 10, we pretty much turned into a standards organization, and the engineering stuff moved other places. The meeting here, the IETF consists of a lot of working groups, and many of those working groups meet here. They are organized by areas. And the areas are important because for you newcomers, if you're interested in a particular working group, chances are the other working groups you might be interested in are in the same area. Now, there's a couple of exceptions, and I'll talk about how the areas are structured a little bit later. Most of our standards work is done in the working groups and is part of the IETF consensus process. Working groups, I'll talk about a little bit further, but working groups are things that last from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. Some of them last 20 years, heaven help us. Mostly they're supposed to be shorter than that. You'll also encounter the term Internet Architecture Board. And that may actually be more well-known than the IETF because it's some ways our publicly facing part of the organization. And there's a lot of details that I could get into, but you really don't need them for this first week. If you want to, I'm going to give you the tools to go do your own research if you need to, or to find somebody, you can buy them a beer and they'll explain more if you want it. So we're all about developing standards for the internet and making them accessible, making them maintainable, making them supportable on a network. Depending on what we're doing, we may be going as deep as just above the link layer and all the way up to just below the application layer. We don't generally get too far up into the application layer, but occasionally we have things like that. We also are very much concerned about this one and this one. Scaling and security. When we got started, security was not something we cared about or we didn't think about as much. It's turned out to be the biggest problem we've had with the early internet protocols. And scaling, well, everybody here has heard of IPv6. That's because IPv4, everybody thought that 2 million some IP addresses was going to be sufficient, or whatever the number was. So how many of you here have been involved in other standards development organizations? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, yeah. That's not a lot. Okay, so you don't have a lot to unlearn. Okay. This organization does not have any formal voting. We work by consensus. We are individual participants. If you come here, we expect you to bring your own technical opinion, not basically be the guy who is fronting for your company and giving your company's, you know, giving your company's, I don't even want, sorry, I get old. So when you get involved in our meetings, if you are giving us a topic that makes no sense technically, we're going to know it. Just be aware of that. We are about letting the market decide and bottom up. The people bring the ideas and then we create standards from those rather than the organization charting groups specifically to deal with ideas that the organization wants to do. Formal standards development organizations tend to work a little bit more top-down than we do. They also tend to have a broader stroke than we are. You have organizations in international standards organizations that deal with steel standards for steels and bolts. There's actually a standard for how to make a fruitcake, for example, and it's actually an ISO standard. So Lots of different things. We don't work on it. If you have been involved with the other standards development organizations, take a deep breath occasionally, because we're not going to do things the way they do them, and you'll notice that a lot. So I keep repeating this. We're not a transitional thing. We're very informal. In fact, I would be normally wearing shorts here, except it's Singapore and it's a little bit more formal than I was prepared for. Also, it's pretty damn cold in here. Mostly, we don't have people showing up in suits and ties. Occasionally, we will cut off the ties of people who do. It hasn't happened for a while, but it's still an option if we can. The people here are smart and very opinionated. Mostly not rude or don't mean to be rude, but sometimes you're going to perceive them as such. The rule here is don't assume you're being insulted unless they tell you you're being insulted, and try not to be insulting to other people in return. Most of the people you're going to meet are fairly welcoming. They are here for a good discussion, or in some cases a good argument about something. You might have a knockdown, drag-out argument in a working group, and then go off and have a beer with a guy and go, okay, we now know what's going on here. So we have our own culture. It's 30 years old. It changes microscopically, incrementally based on the people that show up and how they behave. So we're not going to adapt to you and your culture when you come here. However, over time, you're going to change the way our culture works. Okay, just don't expect it to happen overnight. Now, I've got this last statement here because occasionally with people coming in from other standards development organizations where it's all about voting, we get bulks of people coming in, bringing their idea and trying to vote it into reality. Bad ideas forcefully presented are still bad ideas. We know what bad ideas are, or we mostly can identify them. Sometimes we standardize them, but most we can identify them and get rid of them. So if you are challenged on the technology or the technical approach that you're providing, make sure you have good technical statements about that. For the guy who's taking photos, there are slides and we can get you copies of them. Okay. We meet 3 times a year. We meet all over the world. This is the 100th meeting. We used to meet about 4 times a year way back when. We can't do that anymore. In the meeting, you're going to encounter a bunch of organized activities. The working group sessions, bar none, are the major number of the major groups of things that you're going to see here. But you're also going to see birds of a feather sessions. And a birds of a feather session is sort of a proto-working group. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Internet Research Task Force sessions, I think we've actually got a dozen this time. It's kind of high. You'll have sessions that are sort of the summary of what's going on in an area. So for example, if you're interested in security, the Security Area Advisory Working Group session will be a summary of what's been going on in the security area for the meeting. So it may be worthwhile for you if you're trying to learn a little bit more before getting your feet too wet and other things. On Wednesday, we have a plenary. Sometimes we have 2 of them. Right now, we just have 1 combined plenary, and that's on Wednesday. It's both the administrative about how many people showed up, how we're doing on money, things along those lines, and a technical plenary, which may include technical presentations on a particular topic, and then questions and answers with the Internet Architecture Board and with the Internet Engineering Steering Group. So if you want to ask good questions, that's a good place. There are tutorials and lunch sessions. Tutorials are mostly on this day. Lunch sessions are generally hosted by the host, whoever's paying for part of the stuff that we're doing here. And it's an opportunity for them to talk about something that's near and dear to their heart with a captive audience. Social events, how many people signed up for the social event? Okay. Here's a hint. One of the things the old timers know about is the moment the social is posted, get your ticket. Because in most cases they sell out fairly quickly. If you don't want them, you can always turn them back in or trade them off, but whether. The hackathons, code sprints, and related activities. Did anybody do the hackathons or code sprints here? A Few of you, okay. So the hackathons are basically just go off and do things that are of interest for a group of people. The code sprints are people who are actually writing code that the IETF uses for its standards processing. So if you ever want to contribute to the IETF some of your coding skills, sign up for the code sprint. And then there are some non-public business meetings. You are allowed to go into any of these sessions except the non-public business meetings. There's no sign up, no registration for a working group session. Just go on in, and I'll tell you how to behave in a slide later. Disorganized events. Possibly the most important thing about the IETF is that this is an opportunity for you to meet people who are interested in the same things you are, to make friendships, or technical contacts that might last for 30 years. I'm still having lunch with people I went to the first meeting with. Okay. This is important. It's all about us hearing your ideas and you hearing our ideas, and we synthesizing something better. We really do want to hear from you. And the hallway meetings in many cases are going to be where you get quite a lot of the benefit from this meeting. Bar boss. Things that are not ready for real organization, people basically send a note out to the mailing list saying, hey, we're going to meet in the bar someplace and talk about this topic. Anybody's welcome to come in. So you buy your own beers, but it may be an opportunity to hear about an idea that you thought, okay, nobody else was interested in, but I think we should talk about it. The editing sessions are actually something I want you to be careful about. You may wander around here and you will see groups of people sitting around, usually in a ring, all typing along. Those are people working on documents, usually trying to get them done because they've got people there to work through them. Please don't disturb them if you're not involved in that particular thing. That's the only one I'm going to tell you not to involve people on. Not to annoy people. Most of the time, going up and talking to people is perfectly fine. That's about the only one. Now, there's 3 different ways to get a copy of the agenda: 2 URLs and the app. I recommend the app. These URLs and the app allow you to get access to the list of working group sessions and all the meeting materials that are associated with a particular working group session. So you can click on it and you go, okay, what's the document they're talking about? Oh, that's it. Oh, that's stupid. Throw it away and you move on. Or I like that, and you can find something else. So you're going to end up doing a lot of research when you're working with the IETF. So be respectful of people. Again, like I said, some people don't know they're being rude. Don't assume people are being rude to you. Don't try and be rude to other people. Be nice to each other. Do introduce yourselves. If you're talking with someone and wait for a break in the conversation, introduce yourself, tell them what you're interested in, tell them why you think you might contribute or what you want to know about the whole thing. Harassment. Do we have any of the ombudsmen here? Can you stand up for a second? The IETF has and hold up your badge because, okay. Is it now green? Okay, they keep changing the colors. So there's 3 of these folks. If you feel that you're being harassed or something along those lines, go find one of those folks. It's a badge with a green tag on it that says ombudsman. The problem is we now have lots of green tags did you see the list of, Naveen brought a whole bunch of bag tags. I've got troublemaker on mine. So if you can't find one of those folks, find somebody with one of the colored dots on their badges and ask them to help you. Okay, we have a policy. Mostly because we have a policy, we haven't had much harassment in the last few years. We had incidents before that. But please do be kind to the other folks in there. Anybody ever see those nature films with the army ants where they basically go and attack the carcass and then all that's left is bones? It's a little bit like the IETF at the socials where there's food. So please, when you get a chance, if you're in there, take some food, move away from the line, come on back for seconds, leave some for the other folks. Don't leave your bag unguarded. We're in a good place here, but still, can ruin your entire day if your bag is. Feel free to ask somebody next to you or watch it for you. Get some sleep and enjoy yourself. Don't let this place. Don't let concentration on the standards or the technology stop you from taking a breath from time to time. So, working group sessions here are a continuation of the working group in real time. Our working groups, everything that we do in the sessions here has to be ratified on the mailing list before it becomes a standard or before we move forward on that. The things here, we're focused on the key issues. We're generally working on topics that have already been discussed on the mailing list, but we need high bandwidth to work through them here. The working group will have an agreed work plan, has a schedule to complete stuff, which it mostly never gets to. Most of them last a couple more years than they were actually scheduled for. And they are sometimes preceded by a birds of a feather session. These are not tutorial. Birds of a feather sessions may be a little bit more tutorial. They're about a new idea or trying to figure out if there's enough interest, or trying to figure out which approach between 2 or 3 of approaches is the way a working group should go on a particular set of topics, or is the way a new working group should be formed on a particular topic. The area directors are the guys who basically figure out whether or not the BOF is going to happen. If you want more details, you can approach one of the working group, either the working group chairs or one of the area directors, and ask them for the process for doing it. I'd recommend waiting a few meetings, but it's there if you want it. So I talked about the areas, and I said it wasn't quite as straightforward as going to the same area as the stuff is in, because the areas are set up so that applications, transport, internet, and routing are layering stuff, but security can have stuff in applications, transport, internet, and routing, and operations can have the same thing. So you may have to do a little bit of playing around to figure out which area a topic of interest is in for you. So pointing into the stick, the pointing into the stick is where all the work gets done on a sphere. So when you get up in a working group session, this is probably the most important thing from the slide, it's all about identifying yourself. Get up, identify yourself. Every time you get to the microphone, please have a topic, and please be brief about it when you go there. There's a set of blue sheets. For some reason, we never do them for this meeting, but in every meeting, there's a blue sheet. Sign your name and your organization. We basically scan them and discard the things. They're mainly there so we have an idea of how many people for the next working group meeting, how large we have to make the room. So, okay. Sign the blue sheet. Please be prepared. Read the working group agenda and drafts before you go in. If you don't have the time to do that, ideally, you probably don't have anything to say on the topic. Listen. If the speaker's not speaking up well enough, or you're having problems understanding them, feel free to tell people. Get up and say that the problem, and make sure they fix it. They can't fix it; they don't know it. If you read the draft and you've got a technical comment, feel free to do the brief, but please be brief about it. Don't hog the microphone being the other part of it. Look around you. Most of you have your bags some of you have your bags on the seats here. We've got plenty of room here. Some of the rooms are very full. So please be aware of the folks standing in the back looking for a seat. Move your bags down and make the seats available. Avoid side conversations. You may think you're being quiet. The rest of the room may not. So if you need to do a conversation, go on outside and have that. And how many people here have used Jabber? Okay, that's actually a good start. So in the working group sessions, every working group session has a Jabber channel. And it is where there's a Jabber scribe typing in who's talking and the topic of conversation, not really doing notes on there. But for newcomers, it's really useful to have access to the Jabber channel. It's a chat application. I'll talk about how to get there. And you can put in a comment saying, what was he talking about, or why is this important in the thing? And people in the channel will answer, especially if you're a non-English speaker and the person speaking is English, or the person speaking is a non-English speaker and you're not quite getting what they're saying. So, the IETF has a weird approach to dealing with standards. We looked at a lot of different things, and we finally got to the point of consensus. Consensus is basically, not everybody has to agree, but every comment or every reasonable opinion has to be addressed and done. Now, we've got a couple of different ways of doing consensus. Sometimes it's a working group survey of a mailing list survey of what people thought was going on. Another one is humming. You might end up in a meeting and you may be sending head down on your laptop, and all of a sudden you go, and you're, feedback. It's not feedback. It's the way we do things. So let me give you an example here. So the question for consensus in this room is this room too hot, too cold, or just right? When I ask the question, if you believe that is the answer, please hum. So for example, is the room too warm? Is the room just right? Is the room too cold? The opinion of the chair is the consensus of the room is too cold. Okay, and I actually tend to agree with you. And you people who think it's just right, I don't understand you. Okay, there's actually a good RFC on consensus and humming. I've listed the RFC here. It's useful, just among other things, for the historical and just understand the IETF's approach for dealing with standardization. So you're going to see a bunch of people wandering around with badges on them, and they may have nothing on them. They may have one or more dots on them, and they may also have this dot here. That used to be just printed on the badges. Now it's now a separate sticky, and the smiley face means it's somebody who is willing to basically talk to anybody, willing to help, friendly guys. So you can approach those. You can approach those people for things that are of general questions. Working group chairs are probably the ones with the most number of dots here. By the way, they told me that they are now printing, IAB, IESG, NOMCOM. How does the NOMCOM fit on there? Anyway, they're printing those they're printing the names on the badges. So if you can't remember this, remember blue for the working group chairs. That's the ones you're going to see a lot of. And remember this particular one. The other one you may want to look at as a local host, they are now getting the green tag at the bottom, unfortunately, like the ombudsman. And they are the folks who are responsible for this part, for hosting part of the network. They're the local host. They work with the networking folks. They work with the setup folks here. And if you've got a question about this particular area and this particular IETF, they're good people to go talk to. And I will change the color in the ombudsman. I swear it was orange the last time I looked. Most of these, I will describe. The non-com, you're only going to see these folks in the fall meeting, I guess that's right. So you should see a number of these folks are. The nominations committee is how the IETF picks its managers. The Internet Engineering Steering Group managers, the area directors are there, and the Internet Architecture Board and the Internet Advisory Oversight Committee. Those are the people that get selected by the NOMCOM and then approved through a different process. All right. At this meeting, there are a number of useful people that you should know about. You may never need to know, you may never need to use them, but they are important not only for the meeting but for the IETF standardization process. The first group of the folks are the secretariats. You'll see them wandering around. I've lost track of what the color of their shirts are this year. I think they're in the teal blue shirts. They are employees of a contractor that is responsible for the secretariat functions for the IETF. That's setting up the meeting, managing the servers for the IETF, and everything else. The registration desk is on one side manned by local people that we hire for the registration process, and on the other people are the Secretariat folks that are there. So if you've got a question, you've got problems with a hotel, you've got things that you weren't able to resolve, sometimes they can help you with that. The Internet assigned names and numbers folks, Sabrina. Okay, so stand up for a second. Okay, so when you get to the point of making standards, there are lots of assignments between like which bit is what in a header, what an option code is, things along those lines. The IANA is responsible for managing our registry of those things. And it's what, 400 registries now? 20, okay, 2,500 separate registries. We started out with internet addresses and internet domain names, and now it's lots of other things. So if you are writing a standard that involves things like that, you must talk to them. I mention them because they have a booth here, and actually they're kind of fun. Go over and talk to them anyways. They have candy. So, and they're always basically trying to compete with the RFC editor who is sitting right next to them on how good the candy is, because she also brings her stuff in. So the RFC editor is responsible for turning internet drafts into our documents, our formal published documents. Request for comment. Okay, sorry, I've been told that we're no longer using request for comments, although that's what RFC stood for. It's now like going from International Business Machine to IBM. You know, it's now just IBM. So it's now RFCs. But way back when, RFC1 was literally a document that was going out into the internet community for comments for building what was going to turn into the internet. So, so the series editor is responsible for the editorial characteristics of the documents. The production center and the publication and the publisher are responsible for actually getting the stuff through the process and onto the servers as a final document. So when you get to the when later on, you'll probably end up interacting with them. But like I said, they've got candy. So here are the folks. These folks here are the Secretariat. Portia is the brand new Internet Administrative Director and IETF Administrative Director. And she's here on an interim basis. Ray just left us, although you'll probably see him wandering around. I think he's just hanging on. The IANA staff, you saw Sabrina. Elise is leaving us. She will be retiring as of whenever. She keeps moving her date, so I can't get rid of her on here. Neville is the independent submissions editor. So we have the RC series, and there's a lot of streams that go into that. Some of the streams are coming from the IETF, but there's actually a stream that allows anybody to submit something inside as an independent submission. And Neville and his folks are responsible. Neville primarily is responsible for figuring out whether or not something gets published in that stream. Now, I've got him fading out because he's also leaving. And I think we've got a new guy coming in, so I'm going to have to update pictures pretty soon. So, everything I've said here, in some ways, is represented in the various documents that are available. I just hopefully made it a little bit more fun to listen to. The wiki is actually one of those things you want to go and take a look at. It is very helpful, specifically if you're looking for a ride to the airport on the way back, but it's also where the information on the network is, and where you can put help tickets in and things along those lines. There's a whole bunch of tutorials that we've created over the years. Some of them are pretty relevant, some of them are old. We're still working our way through that process of updating. The IETF has lots and lots and lots and lots of mailing lists. There's one per working group. There's and then there's a bunch of others. There's the IETF mailing list, things like that. I'm not going to go through them. If you really care, take a look. You can subscribe to email to your heart content and get lots of information. You are automatically subscribed to this mailing list, and you can always get off of it. In fact, somebody asked how to. but it's useful because this is information, this is a way we can contact you directly on things that might not make sense for a newcomer, but the rest of us are just going, yeah, same old thing. And the network information is here. Any given network or any given session, just change that number. We finally got the URLs to actually stabilize a little bit. If you go to the terminal room, there's actually a printed copy of the current network information. So if you don't want to go look online or you can't get online, go to the terminal room. The terminal, by the way, I should mention the terminal room has people, a lot of local host people who can help you get onto the network and be helpful. And the terminal room, interestingly, has no terminals, just has printers and hard links. So if you want to plug in via Ethernet instead of Wi-Fi, you can do that. All right. I mentioned the IRTF. Excuse me for a second. I mentioned the IRTF a moment ago. The IRTF was a separate task force under the Department of Defense early stuff, and is now an activity of the Internet Architecture Board. So what ends up happening is the IRTF deals with topics that the IETF is not quite ready for. So one of the things we worked on was delay tolerant networking, which was literally investigating how to run an internet over the solar system. So the Crypto Forum Research Group, CFRG, is sort of a halfway group between the IETF and the IRTF at dealing with cryptography. So if you're interested in things like that, but there's a bunch of them. There's like 12 of them on here. If you get into the app, you can actually filter and just see all of those. You may attend as an observer. You may not be allowed, depending upon how the working group is set, how the research task force group is set up, to talk. Generally, invitation for the research groups is by invitation or by credentialing. So you'll ask to join and it'll say, why should we let you join? Again, it's not part of the IETF exactly, but it does generally meet with us. But it's a useful thing if you're looking to hear about new topics or topics that we may be dealing with in 5 years. Newcomers page, ideally everything we need, everything you might need as a newcomer is sort of linked off of there. There's a bunch of older briefings from the guy who was doing the newcomers brief before, which was much more history, tutorial, things along those lines. So if you want to spend a half an hour looking, hearing about the history of the IETF, there are things there. The tools page is where you would go if you're submitting internet drafts. Lots of information there. Again, I'm just going to give you the URLs. You probably won't need them for a few meetings. And then Jabber, I'll talk about in a second. How many of you brought people with you who aren't actually attending the meeting? Okay, that's kind of small. If we end up having people come along with their spouses, significant others, families, whatever, the Companions program later on for you may be useful because it allows all those people to meet and figure out what they're going to do when you're off nerding or geeking. So keep it in mind. Our definition of newcomer is anybody who's attended 5 meetings or less. So if you have attended 5 meetings or less, you are welcome to go to the newcomers meet and greet. And that is just before the welcome reception. The working group chairs, the area directors will be there. People like me will be there. Where generally various tables are set up to represent each of the areas, so you can go over the area that you're interested in, talk to somebody, and see what's what. If you see 2 people with dots on their badges talking to each other, feel free to interrupt them. This is about you guys in this particular thing. We really do want to hear from you. Newcomers dinner. Naveen, who is one of the secretariat folks, sets up a dinner for the newcomers. It's pay your own way, but they figure out a restaurant and they send people over to it. Send her an email to RSVP. I think that's the date, the date and time right now, but check with Naveen. And it's an opportunity to have a chance to talk to other newcomers and go, what the heck did I get myself into? So, now, how many here have participated or signed up for the mentoring program? Okay. So, the mentoring program, that is about a dozen. The mentoring program is an opportunity for you to get matched with somebody who has interests that are similar to your own, who's been dealing with the IETF for a while. I recommend it if you, and you don't have to do it this meeting, you can do it the next meeting, for example, once you get a better idea of what you want to do. So, Melanie Elkins runs that. She does a pretty good job. So this slide changes every IETF, and it depends upon the particular location we're in. Here, it's safe to wander around. There's really no problem with being out by yourself at night. Again, like anything else, you just sort of watch things. Drugs and chewing gum. I'd never heard the chewing gum one before I knew about the drugs. Be careful of littering. And this one was one that I wasn't able to confirm, but I was told that it's possible if you can connect to an unsecured Wi-Fi thing, they might consider it theft of service. So be a little bit careful about where you go. Still watch your stuff. So, and sorry. There we go. Okay. So, 3 more slides, I think. Networking. By now, you've probably all gotten onto the IETF network. If you haven't, there's a bunch of SIDs, they begin IETF or IETF dash 6, NAT 6.4 or any of those. Each one of those has a separate reason, separate reason for being in existence. Most of them are secured, and the password and user ID are IETF and IETF. That's pretty much all you need to know. In the hotels, we've got one of the best networks that you'll ever see. We've been doing this literally for 30 years, well, 29 years, I think, when we started doing the first network. And we take over the hotels. So if you're in one of the conference hotels, the Fairmont or the Stanford, the Swiss hotel, you're on the IETF network, on the IETF hotel SSID. So another reason for trying to get into the conference hotels. I talked about the terminal room and about the network stuff. So there. So Jabber, I can't give you a recipe for getting onto Jabber. You have to do some research here. But these are the 2 locations you want to go to. This location lists the clients, and it's reasonably up to date. I checked this last time around. This website lists where you can get free Jabber accounts. So you can go off there and sign up something. Once you've got your account set up, generally the chat rooms are the working group name at jabber.ietf.org. Ask somebody in the working group that you're in, and you can join there. Cool. 2 things. Make sure you take the survey. Okay, and the other thing is there is a feedback session at the end of the week. We really appreciate the newcomers showing up for the feedback session. Talk about what you liked about the IETF, what you didn't like about the IETF, and how we can improve things for newcomers. So, we really want to hear from you guys. We want you to be successful participants in the IETF. This is a community. It is a community effort to do all this and do it well. So over this last 30 years, something on the order of 8,000 RFCs or 7,000 RFCs and probably tens of thousands in internet drafts have gone through the system. That's a lot of work from a lot of people who aren't getting paid by the standards organization to do that work. So please take an opportunity to make the most of your stuff here. So with that, I'm going to take some questions, if any. And if you've got a question, please get up to the microphone and tell me your name. At least somebody give me an example so I can show you. Okay. Or does everybody just want to get out of here? Okay, that may be the case. So I got one last one for you. If you want to play Adventure, there's the URL for it. It's an old text game. It's still a classic, and it's still kind of fun. And I dare you to find the last point without cheating. So thank you very much. And I look forward to meeting all of you and talking with all of you, hopefully, for years to come. Thanks. Go forth and standardize.